money can't buy everything. Marcus Wellington had learned this the hard way, as he stood in his marble foyer, watching the 15th nanny in 6 months storm out of his mansion, her designer heels clicking angrily against the cold floor.
Behind him, the sound of expensive vases crashing echoed from the living room, followed by the gleeful laughter of his 7-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan.
"I've worked for celebrities, politicians, and royalty," the nanny had screamed, her face red with frustration. "But these children are impossible."
They're not children, they're tiny demons. As the heavy oak door slammed shut, Marcus rubbed his temples and wondered how 2 small children could defeat an army of highly trained, expensive childcare professionals. Little did he know that the answer to his prayers was about to walk through that same door, not in designer clothes or with fancy credentials, but carrying a worn leather bag and a heart full of secrets that would change everything. The woman who would finally tame his impossible twins wasn't who anyone expected, and the method she would use? It was something that couldn't be taught in any expensive childcare academy. It was something that came from a place much deeper, a place where love meets wisdom, where patience meets understanding, and where the impossible becomes possible. This is the story of how one woman's extraordinary approach turned a house of chaos into a home of healing, and how sometimes the most unlikely person holds the key to what we need most. Marcus Wellington stood at his office window on the 42nd floor, looking down at the busy streets of Manhattan, but his mind was elsewhere. His phone buzzed for the 3rd time in an hour. He already knew what it was about before he answered. "Mr. Wellington. I'm sorry to inform you that Miss Patricia has decided to terminate her employment effective immediately," came the voice of his assistant, Janet. "She said the twins put bubble solution in her coffee and then locked her in the pantry for 2 hours." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Patricia was the 15th nanny in 6 months. She had come with glowing recommendations from the most exclusive agency in the city, had worked for 3 senators and a movie star, and had lasted exactly 4 days with Emma and Ethan. "Did she at least stay until I could get home?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. "No, sir. She left around noon. Mrs. Henderson from next door is watching the children temporarily. She called to say that Emma and Ethan are currently having a food fight in the kitchen." Marcus thanked Janet and hung up the phone. He gathered his things and left his successful tech company early once again. This was becoming a pattern that was affecting his business, but he had no choice. His twins needed supervision, and apparently, no professional nanny in New York City could handle them. The drive to his Upper East Side mansion usually took 30 minutes, but today felt like hours. Marcus tried to understand where he had gone wrong. After his wife Sarah died 3 years ago from cancer, he had done everything possible to give his children the best life money could buy. He hired the most expensive therapists, bought them whatever they wanted, enrolled them in the finest private schools. But nothing seemed to help. Emma and Ethan had been perfect angels before their mother's death. They were bright, creative, and well-behaved children who brought joy to everyone around them. But after Sarah passed away, something changed. They became wild, uncontrollable forces of nature who seemed determined to drive away anyone who tried to care for them. As Marcus pulled into his circular driveway, he could see Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor, standing on his front porch looking frazzled. Her usually neat grey hair was disheveled, and there were what appeared to be mashed potato stains on her flowery dress. "Oh, Marcus, thank goodness you're here, Mrs. B.R., Henderson said as he approached. "I love those children dearly, but I'm 78 years old. I simply cannot keep up with them anymore." Marcus apologized profusely and thanked her for her help. As she hurried back to her own house, Marcus took a deep breath and opened his front door. The sight that greeted him was like a war zone. The marble floors were covered with what appeared to be the contents of his entire refrigerator. Spaghetti sauce painted the white walls like abstract art, and broken pieces of his grandmother's china were scattered across the hallway. "Daddy," Emma's voice called from somewhere in the house. "We're playing restaurant." Marcus found his twins in the kitchen, both covered head to toe in various food items. Emma, with her mother's blonde curls now matted with what looked like chocolate pudding, was standing on a chair attempting to crack eggs into a bowl. Most of the eggs had missed their target and were now dripping down the custom kitchen cabinets. Ethan, his dark hair sticky with what appeared to be honey, was using a wooden spoon to fling flour into the air like snow. The expensive Italian marble countertops were buried under a layer of culinary chaos that would have made a professional food fight look organized. "What happened to Miss Patricia?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "She didn't want to play with us," Ethan said innocently, his brown eyes wide with fake sincerity. "She was being mean." She tried to make us take a nap, Emma added indignantly. We don't need naps. We're not babies. Marcus looked around his destroyed kitchen and felt a familiar wave of exhaustion wash over him. He loved his children more than life itself, but he was running out of options. The nanny agency had already informed him that they were having difficulty finding candidates willing to work for the Wellington family. Word was spreading through the childcare community about the impossible twins who had defeated every professional sent to tame them. After spending 2 hours cleaning up the kitchen disaster, Marcus sat down with Emma and Ethan for a serious conversation. He explained that their behavior was making it impossible for anyone to help take care of them while he worked. He told them how much he loved them, but that he needed help managing the household. We don't want a nanny, Emma said firmly, crossing her arms over her chest in a gesture that reminded Marcus painfully of his late wife. We want Mummy back. Ethan nodded in agreement, his lower lip trembling slightly. Nannies aren't mummies. They just tell us what to do and don't really love us. Marcus felt his heart break a little more. He pulled both children onto his lap and held them tight. He understood their pain because he felt it too. Every day he missed Sarah with an intensity that sometimes made it hard to breathe, but he also knew that driving away everyone who tried to help wasn't the answer. That evening, after finally getting the twins to bed, Marcus called his sister Rebecca in California. She was the only family he had left, and he desperately needed advice. Marcus, you need to stop hiring these fancy agency nannies, Rebecca said after hearing about the latest disaster. Emma and Ethan are smart kids. They can tell when someone is just there for the money. They need someone who genuinely cares about them. But where am I supposed to find someone like that? Marcus asked, running his hands through his hair. I've tried everything. I've offered double the normal salary, full benefits, even a car allowance. No one wants to work for us anymore. Rebecca was quiet for a moment before speaking. Remember when we were kids and Mum hired Mrs. Rodriguez to help around the house? She wasn't trained in childcare, but she loved us like we were her own grandchildren. Sometimes the best people aren't the ones with fancy degrees and expensive training. After hanging up with his sister, Marcus sat in his study surrounded by rejection letters from nanny agencies and glowing recommendation letters for caregivers who had fled his house in tears. Rebecca's words echoed in his mind. Maybe he had been approaching this all wrong. The next morning, instead of calling another high-end agency, Marcus posted a simple advertisement in the local community center and online job boards. He didn't mention his wealth or offer an enormous salary. Instead, he wrote honestly about 2 children who had lost their mother and needed someone who could love them while their father worked. For 3 days, his phone remained silent. Marcus began to worry that his new approach wasn't working any better than his previous strategy. The twins seemed to sense that another nanny search was underway because their behavior became even more outrageous than usual. They turned his home office into a fort using expensive furniture, painted temporary tattoos on each other with permanent markers, and somehow managed to get bubble solution into the mansion's sprinkler system. On Thursday afternoon, while Marcus was in a board meeting trying to explain why his productivity had declined, his phone rang. Janet answered and told him that a woman named Grace Thompson was calling about the childcare position. Put her through, Marcus said, stepping out of the meeting room. The voice on the other end was warm and soft, with a slight southern accent that reminded Marcus of his grandmother. Grace explained that she had seen his advertisement and was interested in the position. She didn't have formal nanny training, but she had raised 4 children of her own and had been caring for other people's children her entire adult life. Mr. Fid, Wellington, Grace said. I read your advertisement, and it sounds like your children are hurting. I've worked with hurting children before. Sometimes they act out because they don't know how else to express their pain. Marcus was intrigued by her perspective. Most of the previous candidates had focused on discipline strategies and educational activities. Grace was the first person to acknowledge that his children might be acting out because they were grieving. Would you be available to come for an interview tomorrow? Marcus asked. Of course, Grace replied. But I should warn you, I'm not like the other nannies you've probably hired. I don't have fancy credentials or a degree from a childcare academy. I just have a lot of love and a lot of patience. That evening, Marcus told Emma and Ethan that another potential caregiver would be visiting the next day. Their reaction was predictable. We're going to make her run away too, Emma declared. We don't want anybody here except you. Yeah, Ethan agreed. We'll put salt in her tea and hide her shoes. Marcus looked at his children and felt a mixture of love and desperation. He knew they were acting out because they were afraid of being abandoned again, but their behavior was making it impossible for him to provide them with the stability they needed. He could only hope that Grace Thompson might be different from all the others who had come before her. Grace Thompson stood at the bus stop on Fifth Avenue clutching a worn leather handbag that had belonged to her mother. At 55, she had learned that first impressions could be deceiving, but she still felt nervous as she looked up at the towering mansions that lined the prestigious street. She had taken 3 different buses from her small apartment in Queens to get here, and the journey had given her plenty of time to think about whether she was making the right decision. When she finally found the Wellington mansion, Grace paused at the iron gates and took a deep breath. The house was even more impressive than she had imagined from Marcus's brief description. It was a 4-story limestone building with perfectly manicured gardens and windows that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Grace had worked in wealthy homes before, but nothing quite like this. As she walked up the stone pathway, Grace noticed something that the previous nannies had probably missed. Despite its grandeur, the house felt cold and unwelcoming. The gardens were beautiful but sterile, maintained by professional landscapers rather than loving hands. There were no children's toys scattered on the lawn, no chalk drawings on the sidewalk, no signs that children actually lived and played here. Marcus answered the door himself, and Grace was surprised by his appearance. She had expected someone cold and intimidating, but the man before her looked tired and worried. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. This was not the face of a successful businessman who had everything under control. This was the face of a father who was struggling. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Please call me Grace," she replied warmly, "and thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet with you." As Marcus led her into the house, Grace's trained eye took in every detail. The furniture was expensive but formal, like a museum display rather than a family home. The walls were decorated with abstract art that looked costly but provided no warmth. There were no family photographs visible, no children's artwork displayed proudly, no signs of the messy, joyful chaos that usually filled homes where children were truly happy. "The twins are upstairs," Marcus explained as they walked toward his study. "I thought it might be better if we talked first, before you meet them. I want to be completely honest about what you would be getting into." Grace nodded appreciatively. She had worked for families who tried to downplay their children's difficulties, and it never ended well. Honesty was always the best foundation for any working relationship. In his study, Marcus offered Grace coffee and began to explain the situation. He told her about Sarah's death, about the children's dramatic personality change, and about the long parade of nannies who had fled in defeat. As he spoke, Grace listened carefully, not just to his words, but to what he wasn't saying. "Mr. Wellington," Grace said gently when he finished, "may I ask you something personal?" Marcus nodded, curious about what she wanted to know. "How are you handling your wife's death?" "I know this is about the children, but grief affects the whole family." Marcus was taken aback by the question. None of the other candidates had asked about his emotional state. They had focused entirely on discipline strategies and house rules. "I suppose I'm managing," Marcus said carefully. "I've thrown myself into work. It helps keep my mind occupied." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "And the children? Do they see you processing your grief, or do they think they're the only ones who are hurting?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He realized that in his effort to be strong for his children, he had hidden his own pain so completely that Emma and Ethan might think he didn't miss their mother at all. They might believe he had simply moved on, while they were still drowning in loss. "I never thought about it that way," Marcus admitted quietly. "Children are very perceptive," Grace said softly. "If they think they're not allowed to grieve because the adults around them seem fine, they'll express their pain in other ways. Sometimes that means acting out, testing boundaries, pushing away anyone who might leave them like their mother did." As they talked, the sound of running footsteps echoed from somewhere in the house, followed by a loud crash and childish giggling. Marcus winced and started to get up, but Grace gently placed a hand on his arm. "Let me go meet them," she said. "But first, I want you to know something. I'm not here to replace their mother, and I'm not here to fix them like they're broken toys. I'm here to love them while they learn to heal." Grace followed the sounds of chaos to the main living room, where she found Emma and Ethan in the middle of what appeared to be an elaborate fort-building project. They had used couch cushions, expensive throw pillows, and what looked like several valuable silk drapes to create a sprawling castle that dominated the entire room. Both children froze when they saw her, their eyes wide with surprise and wariness. Grace took in their appearance with a practiced eye. Emma was wearing a princess dress that was inside out and backwards, with mismatched shoes on her feet. Her blonde curls were tangled and had what appeared to be glitter scattered throughout. Ethan was dressed in pajama pants and a superhero cape, with marker drawings covering his arms like temporary tattoos. Most adults would have immediately started correcting their appearance or demanding they clean up the mess, but Grace did something unexpected. She sat down on the floor at the entrance to their fort and smiled. "Wow," she said admiringly. "This is the most impressive castle I've ever seen. Did you build this all by yourselves?" Emma and Ethan exchanged surprised glances.
This was not the reaction they were expecting from another potential nanny.
Yes, Emma said cautiously.
"We're the king and queen of the castle, and no grown-ups are allowed inside. That's a very important rule," Grace agreed seriously. "Every good castle needs to have clear rules about who can enter."
May I ask what you do in your castle?
Ethan stepped forward slightly, still suspicious, but intrigued by her respectful tone.
We plan battles and have tea parties and hide from people who want to boss us around.
Grace nodded thoughtfully.
"It sounds like you have a very good system. I can see why you would want to protect your kingdom." For the next hour, Grace sat outside the fort and listened as Emma and Ethan explained the complex world they had created. They had elaborate backstories for their royal characters, detailed maps of their imaginary kingdom, and intricate rules governing everything from castle defense to royal mealtimes. As they talked, Grace began to understand what the previous nannies had missed. These children weren't simply misbehaving or trying to be difficult. They had created a fantasy world where they had complete control, where no one could hurt them or leave them unexpectedly. Their fort wasn't just a game, it was their emotional safe space. When Marcus finally came looking for them, he expected to find Grace trying to impose order on the chaos. Instead, he found her sitting cross-legged on his expensive Persian rug, completely engrossed in a story that Emma was telling about a dragon who protected the castle from invaders. "Daddy!" Ethan called when he saw his father. "Grace likes our castle. She doesn't think we're being messy." Marcus looked confused. Every other nanny had immediately begun implementing cleanup schedules and organizational systems. Grace seemed perfectly content to let his living room remain in chaos. "I was just learning about the important work that Emma and Ethan are doing here," Grace explained to Marcus. "They've created something quite remarkable." After the children returned to their play, Grace and Marcus retreated to the kitchen to continue their conversation. "I have to ask," Marcus said, "aren't you going to address the mess? The destruction? The complete disregard for house rules?" Grace smiled gently. "Mr. Pell." "Wellington, your children aren't destroying your house out of malice. They're building a world where they feel safe. If I immediately start tearing down what they've created, I'll just be another adult who comes in and changes everything, without understanding why they need it." Marcus was silent for a long moment, considering her words. "So what would you do differently?" "I would earn their trust first," Grace said. "I would learn why they need that fort, and then I would help them find other ways to feel safe and in control. Children who feel secure don't need to act out. They save their energy for more positive activities." As the afternoon wore on, Grace spent more time with Emma and Ethan. She didn't try to impose any rules or change their behavior. Instead, she observed, listened, and asked thoughtful questions. She noticed that Emma had a natural talent for storytelling and that Ethan was incredibly creative with building and design. She also noticed that both children constantly looked toward the stairs, as if hoping their mother might appear. When it was time for Grace to leave, something unexpected happened. Instead of trying to sabotage her departure with pranks or tantrums, Emma and Ethan actually seemed disappointed that she was going. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Emma asked quietly. "If your father would like me to, I would be honored to return," Grace replied honestly. As Marcus walked Grace to the door, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. "Hope, Mrs. Beckett Thompson," he said. "If you're willing to take on this challenge, the job is yours." Grace smiled, but her expression was serious. "I need you to understand something, Mr. Bard. Wellington. If I take this position, there will be days when your house is messy. There will be times when your children are loud and emotional. Healing isn't a neat, quiet process. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus looked back toward the living room where his children were playing peacefully in their fort for the first time in weeks. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes." As Grace walked back to the bus stop, she felt a familiar mixture of excitement and determination. She had worked with many troubled children over the years, and she recognized the signs. Emma and Ethan weren't bad children, they were hurting children. And hurting children, in her experience, just needed the right kind of love and patience to help them heal. What she hadn't expected was how much the father needed healing too. Grace arrived at the Wellington mansion the next morning, carrying 2 canvas bags and wearing a simple floral dress, that had seen many years of loving care. She had spent the previous evening planning her approach, drawing from decades of experience with children who had experienced trauma and loss. Her method wasn't something she had learned from textbooks. It was wisdom gathered from raising her own 4 children through various crises and helping countless other families navigate their darkest moments. Marcus met her at the door, looking slightly more rested than he had the day before. "I have to admit, I'm curious about your plan," he said as he let her in. "The house has been remarkably quiet since you left yesterday. No food fights, no destroyed furniture, no emergency calls from neighbors." Grace smiled as she set down her bags in the foyer. Sometimes children act out because they're testing whether the adults in their lives will abandon them when things get difficult. When someone stays calm and doesn't reject them after seeing their worst behavior, it can be very reassuring. From upstairs came the sound of Emma and Ethan arguing about something, followed by what sounded like books being thrown. Marcus instinctively started toward the stairs, but Grace gently touched his arm. "Let me handle it," she said. "But I want you to watch and listen. Understanding how I approach situations will help you support what I'm trying to do." Grace climbed the stairs slowly, giving the children time to hear her coming. She found them in Emma's bedroom, engaged in what appeared to be a heated disagreement over a board game. Game pieces were scattered across the floor, and both children looked frustrated and angry. "Good morning, Emma and Ethan," Grace said cheerfully, stepping over the scattered game pieces. "It looks like you're having some strong feelings about this game." "Ethan is cheating," Emma declared, her face red with indignation. "He keeps moving his piece extra spaces." "I am not," Ethan shot back. "You're just mad because you're losing." Instead of immediately taking sides or demanding they stop arguing, Grace sat down on Emma's bed and looked at the game board with interest. "This looks like a very intense game," she observed. "It must be frustrating when you feel like the rules aren't being followed fairly. Emma, can you show me exactly what happened that made you feel like Ethan was cheating?" As Emma began to explain her perspective, Grace listened carefully and asked clarifying questions. Then she turned to Ethan and asked him to share his side of the story. She didn't try to determine who was right or wrong. Instead, she helped both children feel heard and understood. "It sounds like you both want to play this game, but you have different ideas about how the rules should work," Grace said thoughtfully. "What do you think would be a fair way to solve this problem?" Downstairs, Marcus listened in amazement as his children actually began negotiating with each other instead of screaming and throwing things. Within 10 minutes, they had agreed on a modified version of the game rules that satisfied both of them. As the morning progressed, Grace implemented what she privately called her presence and patience method. Instead of trying to immediately change the children's behavior, she focused on building a foundation of trust and emotional safety. When Emma had a meltdown because her toast was cut into squares instead of triangles, Grace didn't dismiss her feelings as silly. She acknowledged that sometimes small things can feel very big when we're already feeling upset about other things. When Ethan refused to get dressed and insisted on wearing his superhero costume to breakfast, Grace didn't engage in a power struggle. Instead, she asked him about his superhero character and learned that this particular hero had the power to protect people he loved from getting hurt. She realized that his costume wasn't defiance. It was his way of feeling strong and in control when the world felt scary and unpredictable. Around mid-morning, Grace opened one of her canvas bags and pulled out a large scrapbook filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes.
"What's that?" Emma asked curiously, abandoning her coloring project to investigate.
"This is my memory book," Grace explained. "It has pictures and stories about all the families I've worked with over the years. Some of them went through very difficult times, just like your family is going through now." Grace opened to a page that showed photographs of a young boy about Ethan's age. "This is Tommy," she said. "His daddy died in a car accident when he was 6 years old. He was so angry and scared that he used to hide under his bed and refused to come out. His mama was worried that he would never be happy again." Both children gathered closer, fascinated by the story and the photographs. "What happened to him?" Ethan asked softly. Grace turned the page to reveal more photographs showing the same boy, but older and smiling brightly. "It took time, but Tommy learned that it was okay to be sad about his daddy and that being sad didn't mean he couldn't also be happy sometimes. Look, here he is at his high school graduation, and here's a picture from his wedding day." Emma studied the photographs carefully. "Was his mama still sad too?" "Oh yes," Grace said honestly. "She missed Tommy's daddy very much, even when she was proud and happy about other things. She learned that you can hold sadness and joy at the same time. They don't cancel each other out." As they looked through more pages of the memory book, Grace shared stories of other children who had faced loss, divorce, illness, and various family crises. She didn't try to minimize their experiences or rush them toward healing. Instead, she showed them that other children had survived difficult times and that their feelings were normal and valid. The real breakthrough came that afternoon when Grace introduced what she called feeling time. Instead of traditional quiet time or forced naps, she created a daily period where emotions were explicitly welcomed and discussed. "In this house, we're going to have a new rule," Grace announced as they gathered in the living room after lunch. "Every day at 2 o'clock, we're going to spend 30 minutes talking about our feelings. All feelings are welcome here. Happy feelings, sad feelings, angry feelings, scared feelings, and confused feelings." Emma looked skeptical. "What if we don't want to talk about feelings? Then you can just listen while other people share," Grace said gently. "Sometimes hearing that other people have feelings too can be helpful, even if we're not ready to share our own yet." Marcus had come home early again, partly to check on how Grace's first day was going, and partly because he was finding it difficult to concentrate on work. He found himself drawn to listen from the hallway as Grace began the first feeling time session. "I'll start," Grace said, settling into her chair with a cup of tea. "Today I'm feeling excited because I get to spend time with Emma and Ethan, and I'm also feeling a little bit sad because I miss my own grandchildren who live far away. Sometimes I have two different feelings at the same time." Ethan raised his hand tentatively. "I'm feeling confused," he said in a small voice. "Confused about what, sweetheart?" Grace asked gently. "I'm confused about why Mommy had to die. Everyone says she's in heaven and that's supposed to be good, but if heaven is so great, why didn't she want to stay with us instead?" The question hung in the air, and Marcus felt his throat tighten. This was exactly the kind of profound, heartbreaking question that he didn't know how to answer. He had avoided these conversations because he was afraid of saying the wrong thing and making the children's pain worse. Grace was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was full of compassion. "That's such an important question, Ethan. It shows that you're really thinking deeply about something very difficult. Can I tell you what I believe about that?" Ethan nodded, his brown eyes fixed on her face. "I think that when people die, it's not because they want to leave the people they love. I think your mommy would have stayed with you forever if she could have. But sometimes our bodies get too sick to keep working, no matter how much we want them to. It's kind of like when a car breaks down so badly that even the best mechanic can't fix it." Emma, who had been listening intently, suddenly burst into tears. "But I miss her so much. I miss her reading me stories and brushing my hair and singing the goodnight song." Instead of trying to stop Emma's crying or distract her from her pain, Grace moved to sit beside her on the couch and held her gently while she sobbed. "Of course you miss her," she said softly. "She was your mommy and you loved her so much. It would be strange if you didn't miss her. Missing someone means they were important to us." Marcus found himself crying too, standing in the hallway listening to his daughter express the grief that he had been trying so hard to protect her from. He realized that in his efforts to help his children move on, he had accidentally sent the message that their sadness wasn't welcome. When Emma's crying subsided, Grace asked if anyone else wanted to share feelings. To Marcus's surprise, Emma wasn't finished. "I'm also feeling angry," she said, wiping her nose with the tissue Grace offered. "I'm angry at all those nannies who tried to make us act like everything was fine when it wasn't fine. And I'm angry at Daddy for going to work all the time instead of staying home and being sad with us." Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach, but Grace's voice remained calm and accepting. "It sounds like you're feeling left alone with your big feelings," Grace reflected. "That must be very scary and frustrating. What would help you feel less alone with those feelings?" Emma thought for a moment. "I want Daddy to tell me that he misses Mommy too. I want him to cry sometimes so I know it's okay for me to cry." From the hallway, Marcus wiped his eyes and made a decision. He walked into the living room and sat down with his children and Grace. Without saying a word, he pulled both Emma and Ethan onto his lap and let them see his tears. "I miss Mommy every single day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been trying to be strong for you, but maybe I've been trying so hard that I forgot to show you it's okay to be sad together." As the three of them held each other and cried, Grace quietly began planning the next phase of her approach. She had successfully created a space where emotions were safe and welcome. Now she needed to help this family learn how to function with their grief instead of in spite of it. The real work was just beginning. That for the first time since Sarah's death, the Wellington family was grieving together instead of alone. 3 weeks into Grace's employment, the Wellington household had transformed in ways that were both subtle and profound. The changes weren't immediately visible to casual observers. The house was still occasionally messy, the children still had emotional outbursts, and Marcus still struggled with balancing work and family. But something fundamental had shifted in the emotional atmosphere of their home. Grace had implemented what she privately called her healing through connection approach. Instead of trying to manage behaviors, she focused on understanding the needs beneath those behaviors. Every action, every outburst, every moment of defiance was treated as communication rather than misbehavior. Emma's tendency to have meltdowns over seemingly minor issues was reframed as a sign that she needed more predictability and control in her daily life. Instead of fighting her need for order, Grace created structured choices throughout the day. Emma could choose between 2 breakfast options, pick which clothes to wear from a pre-selected group, and decide the order of their morning activities. Having these small areas of control helped her feel more secure when unexpected changes occurred. Ethan's habit of creating elaborate fantasy worlds was recognized as his way of processing complex emotions and maintaining a connection to his mother. Grace didn't discourage his imaginative play. Instead, she helped him expand it in healthy ways. They created story journals where he could write and draw about his adventures. And Grace introduced gentle questions that helped him explore real feelings through his fictional characters. Marcus initially worried that Grace was being too permissive, too accepting of behaviors that other nannies had tried to correct. But as he watched his children begin to thrive under her care, he started to understand her philosophy. Traditional discipline focuses on stopping unwanted behaviors. Grace explained to him one evening, after the children were in bed, that children usually act out for good reasons. If we just stop the behavior without addressing the underlying need, the child finds another way to express that same need, often in ways that are even more challenging. She showed him a chart she had been keeping, documenting the frequency and intensity of the children's difficult behaviors over the past 3 weeks. The results were remarkable. Emma's meltdowns had decreased from multiple times per day to perhaps once every few days, and when they did occur, they were shorter and less intense. Ethan's aggressive outbursts had virtually disappeared, replaced by more appropriate ways of expressing frustration. "How is this possible?" Marcus asked, studying the chart in amazement. The other nannies tried everything: reward charts, timeouts, consequences, bribes. Nothing worked. Grace smiled gently. Those approaches assume that children misbehave because they lack motivation to behave properly. But Emma and Ethan weren't acting out because they needed more consequences. They were acting out because they needed more security, more emotional support, and more healthy ways to process their grief. The breakthrough that truly convinced Marcus came during the 4th week, when Grace introduced what she called memory work. She had noticed that the children rarely spoke about their mother, and when Sarah's name came up, they quickly changed the subject or became upset. The house itself contributed to this avoidance. Marcus had removed most of Sarah's photographs and personal items in an effort to help everyone move forward. "Mr. Wellington," Grace said carefully during one of their evening conversations, "I'd like to suggest something that might be difficult for you to hear." Marcus braced himself, wondering what he had been doing wrong now. "I think the children need to have more connection to their mother's memory, not less. Right now, they're getting the message that talking about her or remembering her makes everyone sad, so they're trying to protect themselves and you by avoiding those feelings altogether." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I removed her pictures because seeing them seemed to make the children cry more. I thought it would be easier for them to adjust if they weren't constantly reminded of what they had lost." "But they haven't lost their love for her," Grace said gently. "That love is still there, whether her pictures are on the walls or not. Right now, that love has nowhere to go, except to turn into sadness and anger. What if we help them find positive ways to express their continuing love for their mother?" That weekend, Grace suggested they take a trip to the storage unit where Marcus had placed Sarah's belongings. Both children were hesitant at first, but their curiosity overcame their fear. As they opened boxes filled with their mother's clothes, books, and personal items, something beautiful began to happen. Emma found her mother's jewelry box and spent an hour trying on different pieces, while Grace told stories about how Sarah might have worn them to special occasions. Ethan discovered a box of his mother's childhood books and was amazed to learn that she had loved many of the same stories he enjoyed. "Can we take some of these things home?" Emma asked tentatively, holding a silk scarf that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfume. "Of course," Marcus said, surprising himself with how right it felt. "These things belong to our family. They should be in our house." They returned home with several boxes of carefully chosen items. Grace helped them create a memory corner in the living room where they displayed photographs of Sarah, some of her favorite books, and small mementos that held special meaning. Instead of making the children sadder, having these reminders of their mother actually seemed to comfort them. "Now we can talk to Mummy even though she's not here," Ethan explained to his father. "We can tell her about our day and show her things we made at school." Grace also introduced a weekly tradition called Mummy Stories during their feeling time sessions. Each week, family members could share a memory of Sarah, tell a story she used to tell, or talk about something they missed about her. These conversations were sometimes tearful, but they were also filled with laughter and love. Marcus was amazed to discover memories about his wife that his children held but had never shared. Emma remembered how Sarah used to sing silly songs while cooking dinner, making up lyrics about whatever ingredients she was using. Ethan recalled how his mother would create elaborate bedtime stories featuring him and Emma as the heroes, always ending with them safely at home with people who loved them. As the family learned to grieve together rather than separately, other changes began to occur naturally. The children started sleeping better at night, no longer afraid that their father might disappear like their mother had. Emma's school performance improved dramatically, and her teacher reported that she was participating more in class and had made several new friends. Ethan's creativity flourished in new directions. With Grace's encouragement, he began building elaborate structures with blocks and art supplies, creating physical representations of the safe, loving worlds he had previously only imagined. His constructions became less about escape and more about creation and joy. Marcus found himself able to concentrate better at work, knowing that his children were not only safe, but actually thriving. For the first time since Sarah's death, he began to enjoy parenting again instead of viewing it as a series of crises to manage. But perhaps the most significant change was in the family's daily routines. Grace had restructured their schedule around connection rather than efficiency. Meals became longer, more relaxed affairs where conversation was encouraged and emotional check-ins were routine. Bedtime included not just story reading but also daily gratitude sharing, where each person mentioned something they were thankful for and something they were looking forward to.
Grace also worked on helping Marcus understand his children's individual needs and communication styles.
She taught him that Emma needed advance warning about changes and transitions, while Ethan needed physical affection and reassurance when he felt overwhelmed. She showed him how to recognize the early signs of emotional overload in both children and how to offer support before situations escalated into meltdowns. "The goal isn't to prevent your children from ever feeling sad or angry," Grace explained. "The goal is to help them feel safe enough to experience their emotions without being overwhelmed by them. When children feel emotionally safe, they naturally begin to develop better self-regulation skills." By the end of the first month, Marcus realized that Grace had accomplished something that seemed impossible. His children were still the same children, creative, intelligent, sensitive, and occasionally challenging, but they were no longer driven by fear and unprocessed grief. They had begun to trust again, not just in Grace, but in their family's ability to weather difficulties together. The transformation was so remarkable that Marcus's sister Rebecca noticed the change during a video call with the children. "Emma and Ethan seem like completely different kids," she told Marcus afterward. "They're still themselves, but they seem so much more relaxed and secure. What is Grace doing that's so different from everyone else you hired?" Marcus thought about the question seriously before answering. "I think the difference is that Grace isn't trying to fix my children or change them into something else. She's helping them heal from the inside out, and she's teaching me how to support that healing process. She sees their acting out as communication rather than disobedience." As he watched his children playing peacefully together in their rebuilt fort, now a permanent fixture in the living room that had evolved into an elaborate playhouse, Marcus realized that Grace had given his family something far more valuable than good behavior and quiet children. She had given them back their ability to be vulnerable with each other, to grieve together, and to find joy even in the midst of their loss. The impossible children weren't impossible after all. They had just needed someone who understood that healing happens through connection, not control. 6 months after Grace Thompson first walked through the doors of the Wellington mansion, the transformation was so complete that visitors often remarked they couldn't believe these were the same children they had heard so much about. But for those who knew the family well, the changes went far deeper than improved behavior. The Wellington house had become a home again. Emma, now 8, had developed into a confident leader among her classmates and had been chosen to represent her grade in the school's student council. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called Marcus one afternoon to share her amazement at Emma's growth. "Mr. Wellington, I've been teaching for 23 years, And I've never seen such a dramatic, positive change in a child, she said. Emma went from being withdrawn and angry to being one of our most empathetic and emotionally intelligent students. She has a remarkable ability to help other children work through conflicts and express their feelings appropriately. Marcus wasn't surprised to hear this. At home, Emma had become a nurturing big sister to Ethan, often helping him process his emotions when he felt overwhelmed. She had also developed a special relationship with Grace, often asking thoughtful questions about feelings and relationships that showed wisdom beyond her years. Ethan, at 7, had channeled his creative energy into building and engineering projects that amazed the adults around him. His elaborate constructions now filled the basement playroom that Marcus had converted into a workshop space. But more importantly, Ethan had learned to use his words to express his needs instead of acting out physically. He still had big emotions, but he had developed healthy ways to handle them. The change in Marcus himself was perhaps the most profound of all. He had learned to see his role as a father, not as a manager of behaviors, but as a safe harbor for his children's emotional lives. He had begun leaving work earlier, taking real vacations with the children, and most importantly, he had learned to share his own grief and healing journey with Emma and Ethan. Grace's influence extended beyond just the Wellington family. Word of her success had spread through the community, and she found herself being consulted by other families struggling with similar challenges. Marcus had offered to increase her salary multiple times, but Grace consistently declined. "This isn't about money for me," she explained. "This work is my calling. But I do have a request." Grace's request was simple but meaningful. She wanted to document her methods and create a training program for other caregivers who worked with grieving families. Marcus immediately offered to fund the project, and they began working together to establish what they called the Healing Hearts Initiative. The initiative provided training workshops for nannies, teachers, and other childcare professionals on understanding and supporting children through trauma and loss. Grace's approach, which she formally called therapeutic caregiving, emphasized emotional safety, authentic connection, and trauma-informed responses to challenging behaviors. As their partnership in this work developed, Marcus and Grace's relationship deepened beyond employer and employee. She became a trusted advisor, a family friend, and eventually, something more. The transition happened gradually and naturally. Marcus found himself looking forward to their evening conversations about the children's progress. Grace discovered that her own healing from past losses was deepened by supporting the Wellington family's journey. They shared a commitment to creating stability and love for Emma and Ethan that formed the foundation for a deeper connection. One evening in late spring, almost a year after Grace had first arrived, Marcus found her sitting in the garden with Emma and Ethan, all three of them working on planting flowers in Sarah's memory garden, a project they had started together to honor Sarah's love of gardening. "Grace," Emma was saying as she carefully placed a small seedling in the soil, "do you think Mummy can see these flowers?" Grace considered the question carefully, as she always did when the children asked about their mother. "I don't know for certain what happens after people die," she said honestly. "But I do know that when we plant these flowers with love and think about your mummy while we're caring for them, it keeps her memory alive in our hearts. And that feels very real and important to me." Ethan looked up from where he was arranging decorative stones around the flower bed. "I think Mummy would like that we're taking care of her garden together," he said confidently. "She always said that gardens grow better when people work together." Marcus watched this interaction with a mixture of gratitude and something else he was just beginning to recognize as romantic love. Grace had not only healed his children, she had helped him remember what it felt like to be part of a family unit that functioned with love and mutual support. That night, after the children were in bed, Marcus asked Grace to stay for tea. They sat in the living room where Emma and Ethan's fort still stood, now a beloved permanent fixture, decorated with fairy lights and filled with books and art supplies. "Grace," Marcus began carefully, "I need to tell you something. Over these past months, you've become much more than an employee to our family. You've become essential. I can't imagine our lives without you." Grace smiled, but her expression was thoughtful. "Marcus, I care deeply about this family too, but I need you to be sure that your feelings aren't just gratitude for what I've done for the children. They deserve relationships built on solid foundations." Marcus had been thinking about this very question for weeks. "I've been considering that possibility," he said. "And I think my feelings go beyond gratitude. I admire your wisdom, your kindness, your strength. I find myself wanting to share not just the challenges of parenting with you, but the joys and the everyday moments as well." Their relationship evolved slowly and deliberately, with the children's emotional well-being always as the primary consideration. Emma and Ethan were involved in conversations about what it would mean for Grace to become a more permanent part of their family. Both children were enthusiastic about the possibility, having already begun to see Grace as a maternal figure who complemented rather than replaced their memories of Sarah. "Will you be our new mommy?" Ethan asked Grace directly one day while they were working on a puzzle together. Grace's response was characteristic of her thoughtful approach to difficult questions. "I could never be your mummy because you already had the most wonderful mummy in the world," she said. "But I could be someone who loves you very much and helps take care of you, kind of like a bonus mum. Your real mummy will always be your mummy, and that love will always be special and yours." Emma nodded approvingly. "So you would be like Grace mummy, and our real mummy would still be our Sarah mummy?" "That sounds perfect to me," Grace said, pulling both children close for a hug. A year and a half after Grace's arrival, Marcus proposed to her in the memory garden with Emma and Ethan's full knowledge and participation. They had helped him plan the proposal, including choosing a ring that incorporated Sarah's birthstone alongside Grace's, symbolizing the continuity of love and the addition of new love rather than its replacement. Their wedding was a small, intimate ceremony held in the same garden, with Emma as the flower girl and Ethan as the ring bearer. Instead of traditional wedding vows, Marcus and Grace wrote promises to the family they were creating together. Promises to honor Sarah's memory, to support each other through future challenges, and to continue growing in love and understanding. The Healing Hearts Initiative continued to expand, eventually becoming a non-profit organization that provided support and training to hundreds of families dealing with loss and trauma. Grace developed curricula that were used in schools, hospitals, and social service agencies throughout the region. Emma and Ethan grew up to be remarkable young people who carried their early experiences of loss and healing into their adult lives with unusual emotional intelligence and resilience. Emma became a child psychologist, inspired by Grace's work and her own childhood experiences. Ethan became an architect who specialized in designing therapeutic spaces for children and families. Both children maintained strong connections to their mother's memory throughout their lives, regularly visiting her grave, sharing stories about her with their own children, and carrying forward family traditions that Sarah had started. They also developed deep, loving relationships with Grace, who proved that it's possible to honor the past while building a beautiful future. Years later, when people asked Grace about her secret for transforming the impossible Wellington children, her answer was always the same. There were never any impossible children. There were just children who needed someone to understand that their behavior was communication, that their hearts needed healing before their actions could change, and that love, real, patient, unconditional love, can overcome almost any challenge. Marcus often reflected on how different his life might have been if he had continued down the path of hiring highly credentialed nannies who focused on behavior management rather than emotional healing. Grace's approach had saved his family, but it had also taught him invaluable lessons about parenting, relationships, and the true nature of healing. The mansion on Fifth Avenue, once cold and sterile despite its grandeur, became known in the neighborhood as the house where laughter echoed from the windows and where children played freely in the garden. It became a home where loss was acknowledged and honored, where healing was nurtured and celebrated, and where love had triumphed over the impossible. Grace Thompson had indeed done the impossible, not through magic or special techniques, but through the simple revolutionary act of seeing children for who they truly were beneath their pain, and loving them through their healing journey one day at a time. In doing so, she had proven that sometimes the most profound changes come not from trying to fix what's broken, but from providing the safety and love necessary for healing to happen naturally. The story of the Wellington family became a testament to the power of understanding, patience, and the kind of love that doesn't give up on people, even when they're at their most difficult. It showed that sometimes the person who can do the impossible is simply someone who believes that impossible isn't really impossible at all. It's just misunderstood.